I am Marlene, and I never imagined a spreadsheet could be the weapon that would finally free me from my family's suffocating grip. The morning I discovered my parents had been systematically draining my grandmother's trust fund was the same morning they called to remind me I was still a disappointment at 32. But before I tell you how I exposed their embezzlement scheme and received an itemized bill for my own childhood in return, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. Growing up in the Whitfield household meant understanding your worth was measured in cocktail party anecdotes and country club connections. My mother Sheila, a former pageant queen turned society maven, had built our family's reputation on a foundation of charity galas and strategic dinner parties. My father Vernon, who inherited his real estate empire rather than earning it, spent more time polishing his golf clubs than reviewing his business reports. Together they crafted an image of perfection that gleamed as artificially as my mother's veneered smile. My older sister Brittany understood the assignment from day one. By 16, she was already modeling for local boutiques, her naturally blonde hair and willowy frame checking every box on my parents' list of acceptable achievements. My younger brother Chase, yes, they actually named him Chase, followed suit by excelling at lacrosse and dating the daughters of my father's business associates. He had the kind of easy charm that made small talk feel like an art form, something my parents valued more than any academic achievement. Then there was me, Marlene, with the unfortunate combination of my grandmother's sturdy build, my grandfather's prominent nose, and an inexplicable fascination with numbers. While Brittany was learning to walk in heels, I was teaching myself Excel formulas. While Chase was perfecting his backhand, I was devouring books about financial crimes and forensic accounting. My parents treated my interests like a phase I'd eventually outgrow, like my brief obsession with dinosaurs at age 7. Marlene, sweetheart, my mother would say, watching me pore over financial statements I'd printed from public companies' websites. Wouldn't you rather come shopping with Brittany and me? The Nordstrom anniversary sale is this weekend. The subtext was always clear. Normal daughters cared about fashion, not financial fraud. Acceptable daughters made themselves pretty and charming, not smart and analytical. Worthy daughters understood that their value lay in what others saw, not in what they could uncover. By high school, I'd given up trying to earn their approval through conventional means. While they attended Brittany's modeling shoots and Chase's lacrosse games, I spent my afternoons in the public library, teaching myself advanced accounting principles from textbooks the librarian special ordered for me. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Hannigan, was the only adult who seemed to recognize that my obsession with numbers wasn't just weird, it was a gift. "You have a rare mind, Marlene," she told me once, after I'd helped her uncover discrepancies in the school's fundraising accounts. "Don't let anyone convince you to waste it." But in the Whitfield household, having a rare mind ranked somewhere below having split ends on the scale of family embarrassments. My parents introduced me at social events with apologetic smiles, quickly steering conversation away from my interests and toward Brittany's latest campaign or Chase's acceptance to his father's alma mater. I became the family footnote, mentioned only when absolutely necessary, and always with a subtle note of regret. The breaking point came during my senior year when I was accepted to the State University's honors program with a full scholarship for accounting. That same week, Brittany booked a regional commercial for a teeth whitening product. Guess which achievement got the celebration dinner? Our little star, my father had beamed, toasting Brittany with champagne I wasn't old enough to drink. The Whitfield genes always shine through. I sat at that dinner table, acceptance letter folded in my pocket, watching my family celebrate 30 seconds of regional airtime while ignoring 4 years of full college tuition. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade of my life. If they couldn't see my worth, I'd build it somewhere else. Somewhere they'd never think to look. Somewhere in the numbers they were too proud to understand. College became my sanctuary, 4 blissful years where my analytical mind was finally valued instead of hidden. But even from a distance, my family's indifference cast long shadows. During my sophomore year, I made the dean's list every semester while working part-time at a small accounting firm. When I called home with the news, my mother put me on speaker while she supervised Brittany's spray tan appointment. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice distant and distracted. "Oh, Brittany, make sure they get your left ankle. You missed a spot last time." The pattern was so consistent it became almost comical. Junior year, I uncovered a pricing error in the university's meal plan system that was overcharging students by roughly 12%. The school newspaper ran a front-page story about it, and the administration issued refunds totaling over $300,000. That weekend, my parents threw a party because Chase had been named captain of his fraternity's golf team. "Leadership skills," my father had proclaimed, clapping Chase on the back while guests gathered around to congratulate him. "That's what opens doors in this world." I wanted to ask what doors were opened by saving hundreds of students from predatory pricing, but I already knew the answer. In their world, leadership meant organizing bar crawls and booking tea times, not protecting people from financial exploitation. My graduation day remains burned into my memory like a brand. I'd been selected as the accounting department's outstanding senior, an honor given to one student among hundreds. As I walked across the stage to receive my award, I spotted my family in the audience. My mother was scrolling through her phone while my father checked his watch. Only Brittany and Chase had shown up, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The moment that should have been my triumph was reduced to an obligation they'd barely managed to fulfill. After the ceremony, while other families took countless photos and celebrated over dinner, mine hustled me toward the parking lot. "We need to get back," my mother explained, not meeting my eyes. "Brittany has a callback for that shampoo commercial tomorrow, and we promised we'd help her prepare." A callback. For shampoo. That trumped their daughter graduating summa cum laude with departmental honors. The real knife twist came later that summer when I landed my first real job at Pemberton and Associates, a respected forensic accounting firm downtown. It was fiercely competitive. They hired only 2 junior analysts from a pool of over 200 applicants. When I shared the news at Sunday dinner, flushed with pride and clutching my offer letter, my father barely glanced up from his plate. "Pemberton?" he said, frowning. "Never heard of them. Are they publicly traded?" "No, Dad, they're a boutique firm specializing in—" "Well," he interrupted, turning to Chase, "tell everyone about your internship at the country club. Now that's networking." Chase launched into a story about organizing a charity golf tournament, and just like that, my achievement vanished like it had never existed. My mother didn't even pretend to listen. She was already deep in conversation with Brittany about headshot photography. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. 2 years into my job at Pemberton, I was assigned to a case that would change everything. A nonprofit organization suspected internal theft, and as I dove into their financial records, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The executive director had been siphoning funds through a complex web of false invoices and shell companies, a scheme so elegant in its deception that it had gone unnoticed for years. I spent weeks unraveling the fraud, working late into the night, sustained by coffee and an almost obsessive need to expose the truth. When I finally presented my findings, the executive director was arrested, and nearly $1 million was recovered. The nonprofit's board was so grateful they insisted on recognizing me at their annual gala. "You saved us," the board president told me, tears in her eyes. "Without your work, we would have had to close our doors. Do you understand how many families you've helped?" I called my parents from the parking lot that night, still glowing from the recognition. My mother answered on the 3rd ring, sounding irritated. "Marlene? This better be important. We're at the Weatherby's anniversary party." "Mom, I solved this huge case. They arrested someone because of my work. I helped save a nonprofit from closing." There was a pause. In the background I could hear music and laughter, the sound of the world I'd never quite fit into. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said finally. "Oh, Vernon, look, Brittany just arrived. She's wearing that divine Oscar de la Renta dress we bought her. Marlene, I have to go. Your sister looks absolutely stunning." The line went dead. I sat in my car, still in my best suit, still holding the plaque they'd given me, and finally understood. I could uncover a conspiracy to steal from orphans, and my family would still care more about Brittany's dress label. The idea came to me at 3 a.m, 3 months after that phone call in the parking lot. I was reviewing quarterly reports for a client when I noticed a pattern I'd seen before. Small, systematic discrepancies that suggested someone was slowly bleeding the company dry. As I mapped out the fraud on my laptop, a thought struck me like lightning. How many other businesses were losing money to schemes they couldn't see? How many good people were being robbed by those they trusted? More importantly, why was I making someone else rich with my ability to see what others missed? That night, I made a decision that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I would start my own forensic accounting consultancy. But here's the thing. I knew my family would mock the idea mercilessly. In their world, Whitfields didn't start businesses. They inherited them. Whitfields didn't work with criminals and fraud. They attended charity galas to appear generous. So I made a second decision. They would never know. Starting Vanguard Forensic Solutions while working full-time at Pemberton was like living two lives. By day, I was a junior analyst, keeping my head down and learning everything I could. By night and weekend, I was building my company one client at a time. I incorporated under an LLC that couldn't be easily traced to me, using my middle name and my grandmother's maiden name, Rose Investigations LLC. The early days were brutal. My first office was my studio apartment's kitchen table, cleared of dishes and transformed into command central every evening. I survived on 4 hours of sleep and industrial-strength coffee, taking calls from potential clients in my car during lunch breaks. My first case was for a small bakery whose profits had mysteriously vanished despite increasing sales. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had heard about me through a friend of a friend, word of mouth being my only marketing strategy I could afford. I'll never forget the night I cracked that case. After 40 hours of combing through receipts and inventory records, I discovered the bakery's manager had been processing fake refunds and pocketing the cash. It was simple, almost amateur, but Mrs. Chen had trusted him like family. When I presented my findings, she cried, first from betrayal, then from relief. "You saved my business," she said, pressing a check into my hands along with a box of pastries. I was going to lose everything my husband and I built. That check, $5,000, was the first money Vanguard ever earned. I framed a copy of it, though no one would ever see it hanging behind the false back of my closet, where I kept all evidence of my secret life. Word spread quietly but steadily. Mrs. Chen told other small business owners. Those owners told their friends. Within 6 months, I had more requests than I could handle alone. I hired my first contractor, a brilliant analyst named Gretchen, who'd been laid off from one of the big firms for being too aggressive in her investigations. Together, we exposed embezzlement schemes, insurance fraud, and vendor kickbacks that had cost our clients millions. The turning point came 2 years in when we landed Hartley Manufacturing as a client. They suspected their CFO of fraud, but needed absolute discretion. A scandal could tank their stock price. Over 3 months, Gretchen and I uncovered a $7 million embezzlement scheme that reached into multiple departments. Our investigation was so thorough, so meticulously documented, that the FBI used our report as the foundation for their criminal case. Hartley's CEO was so impressed, he put us on retainer and recommended us to 3 other companies. Suddenly, Vanguard wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I hired 2 more analysts, then 3 more. We moved operations to a real office, though I was careful to choose a building 40 miles from my parents' usual haunts. By day, I was still dutiful Marlene, the Pemberton employee. By night and weekend, I was Rose, the founder of a firm that was quickly becoming the go-to name for corporate fraud investigation in 3 states. The financial success was staggering. In our 3rd year, Vanguard cleared $2 million in profit. By year 4, we doubled that. I could have quit Pemberton, could have shouted my success from the rooftops, but something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of every dismissed achievement, every interrupted announcement, every time my parents' eyes had glazed over when I tried to share my world with them. Or maybe I'd learned that true success didn't need their validation. It needed only the gratitude of clients who'd been saved from financial ruin, the satisfaction of seeing criminals held accountable, and the knowledge that I'd built something extraordinary entirely on my own terms. My secret empire grew in the shadows of their indifference, and somehow, that made it even sweeter. 5 years. That's how long I'd been living my double life, when everything started converging toward a single, inevitable moment. It was a Thursday morning in October, and I sat in Vanguard's conference room, my real office, not the cubicle at Pemberton I'd finally left 6 months earlier, staring at an email that made my hands shake. The Department of Justice wanted to meet with us. They were launching a multi-agency task force to investigate financial crimes in government contracting, and Vanguard had been shortlisted as their primary forensic consulting partner. The contract value, $50 million over 5 years, with the potential for expansion. It would transform us from a successful regional firm into a national powerhouse. "Rose, you okay?" Gretchen asked, using the name everyone at Vanguard knew me by. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile, though my mind was racing. The meeting was scheduled for Monday. The final decision would come by Wednesday. And sandwiched right in the middle of the most important week of my professional life was the one obligation I couldn't escape: the annual Whitfield family dinner. Every year on the third Saturday of October, my parents hosted what they called a family gathering, but what was actually a carefully orchestrated performance. Extended relatives, business associates, and what my mother called people who matter would gather at their colonial mansion to celebrate another year of Whitfield's success. Attendance wasn't optional. I'd tried to skip once, claiming work obligations, and my mother had shown up at my apartment to guilt me into coming. "Family comes first, Marlene," she'd said, though we both knew she meant the family's image came first. As I prepared for the DOJ meeting over the next few days, my mother's texts grew increasingly insistent. Reminders about the dress code, cocktail attire, nothing too severe, updates about who would be attending, the Weatherbys, the Ashfords, Judge Pearson, pointed comments about my +1 status, still single, how disappointing. Saturday arrived like a storm cloud I'd been watching approach for days. I stood in my bedroom, staring at 2 versions of myself in the mirror. On the bed lay the outfit my mother would approve of, a conservative navy dress that whispered, trying but failing to fit in. In my hands I held what I wanted to wear, a sharp black pantsuit that had become my armor in boardrooms and courtrooms. I chose the suit. Something told me I'd need armor tonight. The drive to my parents' house took me through neighborhoods that grew progressively more manicured, where lawns looked like green carpet and houses competed for who could waste the most square footage. My parents' home sat at the end of a private drive, a monument to inherited wealth and curated taste. Every shuttered window, every perfectly trimmed hedge screamed the same message: "We are better than you." As I pulled up, I saw the usual suspects already arriving. My father's business partners with their trophy wives. My mother's charity board friends with their practiced smiles. And there, stepping out of a new Mercedes convertible, was Brittany with her latest boyfriend, a plastic surgeon who looked like he'd been his own best customer. I parked my practical Honda between a Bentley and a Maserati, took a deep breath, and tried to remember why I kept subjecting myself to this. The answer came immediately: Grandma Rose. She'd been the only Whitfield who'd ever really seen me, and she'd made me promise before she died to never let them push me completely away. "They're flawed, sweetheart," she'd said from her hospital bed, her hand weak but warm in mine. "But they're still family. Don't let their blindness make you bitter." Walking up the front steps, I caught a glimpse of the caterers through the window and almost laughed. My parents had hired the most expensive company in the city to serve food that would be picked at but not eaten, to impress people they didn't really like, to maintain a status that meant everything and nothing at once. My phone buzzed. A text from my DOJ contact confirming Monday's meeting time. I switched it to silent and tucked it away. For the next few hours, I'd have to pretend Vanguard didn't exist, that I was still just Marlene, the disappointment, Marlene, the afterthought, Marlene who'd never quite figured out how to be a proper Whitfield. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in a cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her smile tight with disapproval as she took in my outfit. "A pantsuit, Marlene? Really?" She air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. Well, I suppose it's better than last year's dress. Come in, everyone's dying to hear what you've been up to. We both knew that was a lie, but I followed her inside anyway, stepping into the familiar world of crystal chandeliers and conversations as shallow as champagne flutes. Somewhere in this house, among the precious antiques and priceless art, was evidence of the secret I'd discovered 3 weeks ago, the reason this annual dinner would be different from all the others. Tonight, everything would change. They just didn't know it yet. The assault began before I'd even grabbed a glass of wine. My Aunt Vivian, my mother's sister who'd married into pharmaceutical money, descended on me like a perfectly coiffed vulture. "Marlene, darling," she examined me through eyes that had been surgically enhanced to look perpetually surprised. "Still working at that little accounting place? You know, my daughter Cynthia just made partner at her law firm. 29 years old, but I'm sure your thing is nice too." I forced a smile. "Actually, Oh, there's Brittany." She fluttered away mid-sentence, drawn to my sister like a moth to a designer flame. "That dress! You must tell me where you found it." The reception area was already thick with guests, each clutching drinks they'd barely touch and opinions they couldn't wait to share. I recognized the usual cast, the Weatherbys with their permanent tans and temporary morals, Judge Pearson who'd fixed more tickets than trials, and various business associates whose names I'd never bothered to learn because they'd never bothered to learn mine. I made it 3 steps toward the bar before my father intercepted me. Vernon Whitfield looked like what would happen if a country club became sentient, all polo shirts and practiced handshakes, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Marlene," he said, in the tone you'd use for a stain you'd just noticed on the carpet. "Glad you could make it. Though I see you've decided to dress like you're auditing someone, rather than attending a social gathering." "Hello, Dad, nice to see you too." He was already looking past me, scanning for more important arrivals. "Chase tells me you finally left that Pemberton place. Finally realized there wasn't much future there, eh? Well, it's never too late to find a more suitable path. Have you thought about real estate? I could probably find you something in one of my office buildings." "Reception work, maybe?" "Reception work. After building a multi-million-dollar firm, after being courted by the Department of Justice. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper." "That's generous, but I'm actually Vernon." One of his golf buddies appeared, saving me from having to finish that sentence. "Is it true what I heard about the Riverside development?" And just like that, I ceased to exist. I grabbed a glass of wine from a passing server and decided to find a corner where I could observe the circus without becoming part of the act. But in the Whitfield house, there was no escaping performance. "Oh my God, Marlene!" The voice was artificially sweetened, like aspartame trying to pass for sugar. I turned to find Bethany Morris, one of Brittany's model friends who'd peaked in high school and been coasting on the fumes ever since. "I haven't seen you in forever. Are you still doing that math thing?" "Accounting," I corrected, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Right, with computers and stuff?" She laughed like I'd admitted to collecting stamps. "That must be so stable. You know, Brittany just booked a campaign with Louis Vuitton. Can you imagine? Louis's actual Vuitton, but I'm sure your spreadsheets are exciting too in their own way." Across the room I watched my mother hold court, gesturing dramatically as she told some story that undoubtedly featured her in the starring role. Brittany stood beside her, a blonde mirror image, while various admirers hung on their every word. The mother-daughter resemblance was uncanny, not just in looks, but in the way they weaponized charm like a credit card with no limit. "Marlene!" My mother's voice cut through the crowd. "Come here, sweetheart. Mrs. Ashford was just asking about you." I made my way over, already knowing what was coming. Mrs. Ashford, whose main accomplishment was marrying well twice, looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for 3-legged dogs. "Your mother tells me you're still single," she said, as if diagnosing a terminal illness. "You know, my nephew just got divorced. He's an orthodontist, makes good money, very stable. I could arrange something?" "That's kind, but—" "She's too focused on her career," my mother interrupted, saying, "career. The way others might say, drinking problem. We keep telling her there's more to life than numbers, but you know how stubborn she is. Well, Mrs. Ashford patted my arm condescendingly. There's still time. You're what, 35? 32. Oh, well, you wear it well. The conversation continued around me, not with me. They discussed my singleness, my career choices, my appearance, all while I stood right there, apparently invisible despite being the topic. It was like being a ghost at my own roast. Chase appeared at my elbow looking every inch the fraternity president he'd never stopped being. Hey sis, Mom wants to know if you're staying for the whole dinner or if you have to rush back to your calculator. He smirked at his own joke. Seriously though, try to be normal tonight? Mom's stressed about the Henderson deal, and you know how you can be. How I could be. As if my existence was an inconvenience they all had to manage. The next hour was a masterclass in subtle cruelty. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Feigned interest, backhanded compliment, dismissive redirect to someone more important. I learned that Brittany's commercial work was practically art, while my work was practical, I suppose. That Chase's ability to organize charity golf tournaments showed real leadership, while my building a company showed an unfortunate obsession with money. By the time dinner was announced, I'd been reminded no fewer than 12 times that I was single, 6 times that my outfit was interesting, and 4 times that accounting was not for everyone, but someone has to do it. The dining room had been transformed into what my mother considered the height of elegance. Crystal everything, enough flowers to stock a funeral home, and place cards that had probably been agonized over for hours. I found my seat at the far end of the table, the Whitfield equivalent of Siberia, between Cousin Jeffrey, who sold insurance, and Great Aunt Mildred, who sold everyone on her opinions about the younger generation. As we settled in, I noticed my usual seat had been pushed even further from the family center. Brittany sat at my father's right hand, Chase at my mother's left, while I'd been relegated to the conversational wasteland reserved for plus ones and distant relatives. The message wasn't subtle, but then again nothing about the Whitfields ever was. The first course arrived, some architectural salad that looked better than it tasted, and my father stood tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent with practiced ease. Before we begin, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no, I wanted to share some exciting family news. As you all know, the Whitfield name has always stood for excellence, for achievement, for a certain standard. I felt my stomach tighten. Family announcements at these dinners were never good news for me. First, let's congratulate Brittany on her recent engagement to Dr. Philip Morrison. He gestured to the plastic surgeon, who stood and waved like he'd just won an award. A spring wedding at the country club, exactly as it should be. Applause rippled through the room. Brittany beamed, flashing a ring that could be seen from space. This was news to me, but then again, when had I ever been included in family milestones? And Chase, my father continued, has just been made junior partner at Whitfield Enterprises. The legacy continues. More applause. Chase stood and gave a mock bow, soaking in the adoration. Junior partner at 28, in a company he'd been handed like a birthday present. The room treated it like he'd cured cancer. Which brings me to a more difficult matter. My father's voice shifted, and I knew with sickening certainty what was coming. As many of you know, the Whitfield family has always prided itself on maintaining certain standards. We've built our reputation carefully over generations, which is why it pains me to address what I can only call a persistent disappointment. Every eye in the room turned to me. I set down my fork carefully, my hands surprisingly steady. Marlene, he said my name like it tasted bad, has chosen, despite every opportunity we've given her, to pursue a path that frankly embarrasses this family. While her siblings have understood the importance of image, of connections, of building upon the family legacy, she has insisted on this obsession with other people's money problems. Forensic accounting, I corrected quietly, but he continued as if I hadn't spoken. We've tried to be patient. We've tried to be understanding. But when someone consistently refuses to uphold the family standards, when they insist on associating with criminals and fraudsters, when they show no interest in marriage or continuing the family line. He paused for effect, the way he must pause in board meetings when firing someone. Well, decisions must be made. My mother stood beside him, her face arranged in an expression of martyred sorrow. "This hurts us more than anyone," she said, though her voice held all the emotion of a weather report. "But we have to think of the family's reputation, the associations. What will people think when they hear a Whitfield spends her time investigating embezzlement and fraud? They'll wonder what she knows about such things. They'll question our integrity." "Therefore," my father resumed control, "your mother and I have made the difficult decision to formally adjust our estate planning. Effective immediately, Marlene will no longer be considered a beneficiary of the Whitfield family trust. She's chosen her path, and it's one that leads away from this family." The room was so quiet I could hear the caterers breathing in the kitchen. Everyone stared at me, waiting for tears, for begging, for the drama that would complete their evening's entertainment. I felt the moment crystallize around me like amber, preserving this perfect snapshot of their. "Furthermore," my mother added, because apparently disowning me once wasn't enough, "we think it's best if you limit your attendance at family functions going forward, just until you reconsider your choices. We'll still send Christmas cards, of course. We're not monsters." "No," I thought, looking around the table at their expectant faces. "You're worse. You're people who mistake cruelty for class and call it love." My phone, silent in my pocket, vibrated against my leg. I didn't need to check it to know it was probably Gretchen or someone from the team, my real family, the people who actually valued what I could do, not what I looked like doing it. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My father blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. Yes, unless you have something to say?" I did. I had so much to say that it burned in my throat like acid, but not yet, not quite yet. "May I be excused to take a call?" I asked politely. "It's work-related." "Of course it is," Brittany muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even at her own disinheritance, she can't stop thinking about numbers. Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and mean and so familiar it felt like home. The wrong kind of home. The kind you run from. I stood, placed my napkin carefully on my chair, and reached for my phone. "I'll just be a moment." I stepped into my father's study, the one room in the house where real business happened, where numbers actually mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me as I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly from anger rather than nerves. 3 missed calls from Harold Brennan, our DOJ contact. 1 from Gretchen. 2 texts marked urgent. I dialed Harold back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Rose!" His voice boomed through the speaker, full of an excitement I'd never heard from the typically reserved federal attorney. "I know it's Saturday night, but I couldn't wait until Monday to tell you. Are you sitting down?" "I'm standing in my father's study," I said, which seemed appropriate somehow. "Well, you might want to grab a chair. The committee met this afternoon. It was unanimous, Rose. Unanimous. Vanguard Forensic Solutions has been selected as the primary contractor for the Financial Crimes Task Force. $50 million over 5 years, with options to expand based on performance." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my father's mahogany desk, the same desk where he'd made the deals that built his empire, where he'd never once invited me to sit. "Rose? Are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. "Harold, are you absolutely certain?" "The contracts will be ready for signature Monday morning, but Rose, that's not even the best part. The Attorney General herself specifically mentioned your work on the Hartley case. She called it the gold standard of forensic investigation. They want to hold a press conference Thursday to announce the partnership. This is going to be national news." National news. My face, my company, my work splashed across newspapers and websites. The secret would be out in the most spectacular way possible. "There's more," Harold continued, his enthusiasm infectious even through my shock. "They want you to testify before the Senate Committee on Financial Crimes next month. You're going to help shape federal policy, Rose. Your methods, your standards, they're going to become the blueprint for how this country fights financial crime." I sank into my father's leather chair, the one no one else was allowed to use. Outside the study door I could hear the dinner continuing, the clink of silverware and crystal, the murmur of voices discussing my failure to live up to the Whitfield name. "Harold, thank you. This is incredible. You've earned it. Every bit of it. Oh, and Rose? The FBI wants to talk to you about a consulting contract too. Apparently, word gets around when you're the best at what you do." We arranged to meet Monday morning to finalize everything, and I ended the call. For a moment I sat in the forbidden chair, in the sanctuary of my father's success, holding proof of my own. $50 million, national recognition, the validation I'd never sought but somehow found anyway. My phone buzzed again. Gretchen this time texting, "Holy shit, Rose, we got it, the whole team is freaking out, Champagne Monday?" Then another from Marcus, our lead analyst. "Just saw the email. I'm literally crying. We did it. You did it." And another from Jennifer. "My daughter asked what I do at work. I get to tell her I help catch bad guys. Thank you for building something that matters." I stood up, straightened my suit jacket, and looked around my father's study one last time. The walls were covered with his achievements, photos with senators, framed deals, the trappings of inherited success. None of it held a candle to what I'd just accomplished. Built from nothing but determination and the ability to see what others missed. The walk back to the dining room felt different. The hallway portraits of stern Whitfield ancestors seemed less imposing, the chandelier light felt warmer, even the sound of their voices, still dissecting my failures, couldn't touch the glow of victory spreading through my chest. I paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. They'd moved on to the main course. Some elaborate fish dish that looked like it belonged in a museum. My mother was regaling table with a story about the charity auction she'd organized. My father was deep in conversation with Judge Pearson about golf handicaps. Brittany was showing off her ring to anyone who'd look, while Chase held court with his fraternity stories. Not one of them had noticed I'd been gone. I returned to my seat, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Aunt Mildred immediately launched into a lecture about young people and their phone addiction, but I barely heard her. In 5 days, my face would be on the news. In 5 days, the Whitfield name would be associated with my company, my work, my success. But sitting there, surrounded by people who'd just disowned me for being exactly who I was, I realized something else. They didn't deserve to find out with the rest of the world. They didn't deserve to claim my success after rejecting everything that led to it. No, they deserved something else entirely. They deserved the truth about what their perfect family reputation was really built on. "Marlene, are you even listening?" Aunt Mildred's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "Actually," I said, standing up again, this time with purpose, "I have an announcement of my own." The room fell silent, though not with the respectful attention my father commanded. This was the confused quiet of people witnessing a disruption to the natural order, like watching a servant speak at a royal banquet. "Marlene!" My mother's voice carried a warning sharper than the silver knife beside her plate. "We're in the middle of dinner." "Yes, you are," I agreed, remaining standing. "In the middle of dinner, in the middle of disowning me, in the middle of explaining how I'm an embarrassment to the Whitfield name, so I thought you should know exactly who you're cutting off." Chase laughed, the sound ugly and dismissive. "Oh, this should be good. What? Did you get promoted to senior accountant?" "In a way." I pulled out my phone, bringing up the email from Harold. "I just received confirmation that my company, Vanguard Forensic Solutions, has been awarded a $50 million contract with the Department of Justice. We'll be the primary forensic investigator for their new financial crimes task force." The silence changed quality, shifting from dismissive to stunned. My father's fork hovered halfway to his mouth. "Your company?" Brittany's voice cracked slightly. "The one I built from nothing. The one that's investigated over 200 cases of fraud and embezzlement. The one that's recovered nearly $60 million in stolen funds." I let that sink in. "The one that employs 37 people and has offices in 3 states. That company." "That's impossible," my father said flatly. "You work at Pemberton." "I left Pemberton 6 months ago to run my company full-time. You'd know that if you'd ever asked about my life instead of just judging it." My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "You're lying. This is some pathetic attempt to—" "The press conference is Thursday," I interrupted. "National news, as Harold put it. The Attorney General herself will be there. Feel free to Google it Friday morning." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, demands for proof. But I wasn't done, not even close. "But that's not why I'm telling you this." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded set of papers I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. You see, when you build a forensic accounting firm, you get very good at recognizing patterns, like unusual withdrawals from trust funds, systematic transfers that don't quite match the paperwork, shell companies that exist only to move money from one place to another. My father's face went from pale to gray. What are you talking about? Grandma Rose's trust. I unfolded the papers slowly, deliberately. The one she set up for her grandchildren's education and futures. The one that should have had $8 million in it when she died. The one that mysteriously only had $2 million left, despite her explicit instructions that it remain untouched until her death. You had no right to look into that, my mother hissed, but her voice shook. Actually, I did. Grandma Rose made me a trustee 6 months before she died. She was worried about some discrepancies she'd noticed. I held up the first document. Would you like to explain the quarterly transfers to VW Holdings, Dad? The company registered in the Caymans that shares your initials? Glasses stopped clinking. Forks stopped moving. Even the caterers in the kitchen seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Or maybe, I continued, turning to the next page, Mom would like to discuss the consulting fees paid to Sheila's Solutions. $300,000 for services that, as far as I can tell, consisted entirely of being Vernon Whitfield's wife? This is ridiculous, my father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You're making wild accusations based on 3 years of bank records, incorporation documents, and a very interesting conversation with Grandma Rose's former attorney. I set the papers on the table. The man you had removed as executor because he asked too many questions. How dare you? My mother's voice had risen to a pitch normally reserved for discovering the wrong flowers at a gala. How dare you come into our home and accuse us of stealing $6 million from your children's inheritance to fund this? I gestured around the room at the excess, the waste, the hollow performance of wealth. To pay for Brittany's modeling career that never turned a profit? To bail out Chase's failed business ventures? To maintain a lifestyle you couldn't actually afford after Dad's last 3 deals went south? The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. I watched it sink into their faces, watched the indignation crumble into something uglier. Fear. You can't prove anything, my father said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. I can, and I have. Every transaction, every shell company, every forged signature. I picked up my purse, my movements calm despite the adrenaline flooding my system. But here's the thing, I'm not going to turn you in, not because you deserve mercy, but because Grandma Rose wouldn't want me to. She loved you despite knowing exactly what you were. I looked around the table one last time, at the faces that had dismissed and diminished me for 32 years. Instead, I'm going to use my half of what's left to help people who've been victimized by fraud. A foundation in Grandma Rose's name. Something actually worthy of the Whitfield legacy. Your half? Brittany's voice was small, confused. Oh, didn't they tell you? They can't cut me out of Grandma's trust. I'm not just a beneficiary, I'm a trustee, which means I control the distributions. I smiled, and it felt like taking off a mask I'd worn too long. Congratulations on your disinheritance, at least yours was just verbal. I walked out of my parents' house without looking back, leaving behind a dining room full of people who'd just learned that their careful constructions were built on stolen foundations. The October air hit my face like freedom itself, sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of disappointment and denial. My hands shook as I fumbled for my car keys, but not from fear or sadness. It was pure adrenaline, the kind that comes from finally saying truths you've swallowed for years. I sat in my Honda for a moment, surrounded by luxury vehicles that suddenly looked like expensive lies, and did something I hadn't done in that house for years. I laughed. Really laughed, until tears streamed down my face and my ribs ached. Then I called Gretchen. Rose, how's the family dinner going? Do you need an emergency extraction? I can fake a crisis. It's over, I said, still half laughing, half crying, all of it, the dinner, the pretending, everything, and Gretchen, we got the contract. The scream of joy through the phone was so loud I had to hold it away from my ear. Are you serious? Oh my God, Rose, where are you? You're not still at that horrible dinner, are you? I'm leaving now. Are you at the office? Marcus and I were just finishing up the Richardson audit. Jennifer's here too. She wanted to prep for Monday's meeting. She paused. Rose, did you just say the dinner is over? It's only 8:30. Long story. I'll tell you when I get there. And Gretchen? See if anyone else from the team wants to come in. We should celebrate. Already texting. Drive safe. And Rose? Whatever happened tonight, we've got you. The 40-mile drive to our office felt like traveling between dimensions. From the manicured lawns of inherited wealth to the bustling downtown district where people built things instead of inheriting them. From a world where appearance was everything to one where results mattered. From a family that saw me as a disappointment to one that saw me as I really was. Our building wasn't much to look at. A converted warehouse in the arts district, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures. But pulling into the parking lot felt like coming home. Really home, not the performance of home I'd just left behind. Light spilled from our third-floor windows, and I could see figures moving around inside. The elevator ride up was accompanied by the familiar sounds of my real life. The hum of computers that never quite shut down, the distant ring of phones forwarded to the answering service, the echo of footsteps on concrete floors. This was what success sounded like. Not crystal clinking, but work happening. I barely made it through the door before Gretchen engulfed me in a hug that nearly knocked me over. She was still in her Saturday casual clothes, jeans and a t-shirt that read, "I found your fraud," but her eyes were bright with tears. $50 million, she whispered fiercely. Do you understand what you've built here? Do you get it now? Behind her, Marcus was pulling champagne from the break room fridge, the good stuff we'd been saving for someday. Jennifer was already setting up glasses on the conference table, her usual reserved demeanor cracked by a grin she couldn't suppress. Within 20 minutes, half our team had assembled, some in pajamas, some clearly pulled from date nights, all vibrating with the kind of joy that comes from shared victory. To Rose, Marcus raised his glass once everyone had arrived. Who saw something where others saw nothing, and built a company that matters? To Vanguard, I countered, my voice thick with emotion. And to the best team anyone could ask for. We drank and laughed and told stories about our worst cases and biggest wins. Tom shared how his daughter's teacher had asked him to speak on career day after learning what he did. Lisa talked about testifying in court for the first time, how the judge had commended our thorough work. Even Quiet David, our newest analyst, shared how his grandmother had called him a hero after he'd explained what forensic accounting really meant. My family never got it, he admitted, his cheeks pink from champagne and pride. They kept asking why I didn't just become a regular CPA, but when I told them about the Henderson case, about how we saved those pensioners from losing everything, my grandma cried, said I was doing God's work with spreadsheets. Speaking of family, Gretchen said carefully, studying my face, you want to tell us what happened tonight? You look like you've been through war. I settled into my chair, my real chair, in my real office, surrounded by my chosen family, and told them everything. The disownment, the call from Harold coming at the perfect moment, the revelation about the embezzlement. They listened with the kind of attention my biological family had never given me, gasping at the right moments, anger flashing in their eyes at others. You exposed them right there? At dinner? Jennifer's eyes were wide. That's badass, Lisa finished. That's completely badass. They stole from their own mother? Tom shook his head. And had the nerve to call you an embarrassment? The irony wasn't lost on me, I said dryly, refilling my glass. Well, their loss is our gain, Gretchen raised her glass again. To found families, the kind you choose. The kind that choose you back, Marcus added. We toasted again and I felt something settle in my chest. This was what acceptance felt like. Not tolerance, not obligation, but genuine celebration of who you were and what you could do. The calls started at 6:47 Sunday morning. My father first, his voicemails cycling through the 5 stages of grief in real time. Denial. Marlene, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Anger. You had no right to ambush us like that. Bargaining. Let's discuss this like adults. Depression. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. And finally acceptance, though his version sounded more like a threat. Fine, we'll handle this our way. By noon, I'd blocked 17 numbers. Extended family members who'd barely acknowledged my existence suddenly needed to share their opinions about respect and gratitude. Brittany left a series of increasingly unhinged texts about how I'd ruined her engagement announcement. Chase sent a single message, "Real classy, sis. Hope your calculator company was worth it." Calculator company. Even now, even after everything, they couldn't see what I'd built. Monday morning arrived with the DOJ meeting and a new phone policy. Unknown numbers went straight to voicemail. Gretchen fielded calls at the office, her expression growing more incredulous with each one. "Your Aunt Vivian just called," she reported after hanging up on attempt number 4. "She wanted to know if you'd had a nervous breakdown and if you needed the number for her psychiatrist." "Tell her I've never been saner," I said, reviewing the contract Harold had sent over. "Oh, and your mother tried calling from the country club line. I may have accidentally hung up on her 3 times. The victory of signing the DOJ contract should have been pure, but my family seemed determined to taint it. Emails flooded my personal account with subject lines ranging from disappointed to family emergency to you've made your point. I set up an autofilter that sent anything from a Whitfield domain straight to trash. Tuesday brought lawyers. Not criminal lawyers, even my parents weren't that bold. These were estate attorneys, armed with documents and arguments about why I couldn't possibly be Grandma Rose's trustee, why there must be some mistake, why family matters should be kept private. I forwarded everything to my own attorney, Sandra Keating, who'd helped establish Vanguard and understood exactly what we were dealing with. "They're grasping," she told me over lunch. "Your grandmother's will is ironclad. She clearly knew what she was doing when she named you trustee." "She knew exactly what they were," I said, remembering our last conversation. "She just loved them anyway." Wednesday was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before someone drops a nuclear bomb on your life. I should have known they were planning something when the calls stopped, when even Brittany's Instagram went dark. But I was busy preparing for Thursday's press conference, choosing between suits, practicing my remarks, trying not to think about how my parents would react when they saw their disowned daughter on national news. The bomb arrived Thursday morning, 6 hours before the press conference, delivered by courier to both my home and office. A thick manila envelope marked personal and confidential, which should have been my first warning. Inside was a document that made my blood run cold, then hot, then something beyond temperature altogether. "Invoice for services rendered," read the header in an elegant font that screamed expensive lawyer. Below it, parental investment in Marlene Whitfield, 1992-2010. They'd itemized my childhood. Every dance lesson I'd quit, every summer camp they'd endured sending me to, every birthday party thrown in their image rather than mine. Private school tuition, $387,420. Medical and dental, $67,832. Food and housing calculated at market rates, $234,876. Emotional labor and opportunity cost, $95,000. The total, helpfully bolded and underlined, $847,293. Payment expected within 30 days to avoid legal action. Attached was a letter from their attorney explaining that since I'd rejected the family and their values, I was morally and potentially legally obligated to reimburse them for their investment in my upbringing. They cited cases, precedents that didn't quite apply, twisted legal logic that would have been laughable if it wasn't so revealing. But the real knife twist was the personal note my mother had included. Written on her monogrammed stationery, "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By destroying our reputation and stealing what's ours? You owe us more than money, Marlene, you owe us the daughter we deserved." I sat at my desk, holding the invoice, and did something that probably surprised the courier still waiting in our lobby. I laughed. Deep, genuine laughter that brought Gretchen running. They sent me a bill," I managed between gasps, "for being their daughter. They literally billed me for disappointment." Gretchen read through it, her expression shifting from confusion to disgust, to a protective anger I'd only seen when she'd confronted corrupt CFOs. "Please tell me you're going to frame this. Please tell me this is going on your office wall as a reminder of exactly why you built something better." "Better idea," I said, pulling out my phone. "Sandra, I need you to draft a response to an invoice I just received. Yes, an invoice, for my childhood. No, I'm not joking. I looked at the press conference outfit hanging on the back of my door, at the DOJ contract on my desk, at Gretchen's fierce loyalty, at the company I'd built from nothing but determination and the ability to see truth in numbers. Tell them payment was already rendered, I continued, in full, the day I chose to be more than their expectations. The press conference changed everything. Standing at that podium, flanked by officials from the Department of Justice, I watched my two worlds collide in real time. Every major news outlet carried the story. Forensic accounting firm lands historic federal contract. But it was the human interest angle that caught fire. Local girl builds empire, helps recover millions in stolen funds, dedicates career to justice. My phone buzzed throughout the conference with texts from reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. 3 were from journalists asking if I was the Whitfield daughter, from the society pages. My family's reaction was swift and predictable. A tersely worded statement from my father's PR firm about how the family has always supported Marlene's career choices and were proud of her accomplishments. The same man who'd called me an embarrassment was now claiming credit for my success. But I had more important work to do than managing their revisionist history. The Rose Whitfield Foundation launched 6 weeks later, funded with my portion of what remained in Grandma's trust. The irony of using money my parents hadn't managed to steal to help victims of financial fraud wasn't lost on anyone, least of all them. Their lawyers sent cease and desist letters about using the Whitfield name. Sandra responded by pointing out that Rose Whitfield was my grandmother's legal name, and they had no standing to prevent me from honoring her memory. Our first case came through Gretchen's hairdresser, of all people. Maria's elderly mother had been scammed out of her life savings by a contractor who'd taken payment for home repairs that never happened. The police said it was a civil matter. Adult Protective Services said she wasn't incompetent, just trusting. Everyone had reasons why they couldn't help. "We can help," I told Maria in our conference room, watching her fight back tears. "That's what the foundation is for." We caught him in 3 weeks. The contractor had done this 17 times before, always targeting elderly women, always keeping the amounts just low enough to avoid serious scrutiny. Our investigation revealed a pattern of bank transfers, fake companies, and forged receipts that painted a clear picture of deliberate fraud. The prosecutor, armed with our evidence, brought criminal charges. Maria's mother got her money back. The contractor got 3 years. Word spread the way truth always does. Quietly at first, then in a flood. Calls came from across the state. Children whose parents had been scammed, elderly people ashamed to admit they'd been fooled, families torn apart by financial betrayal. We took cases the big firms wouldn't touch, the ones where profit margins couldn't justify the work. The foundation covered costs. Vanguard provided expertise. Justice, it turned out, was its own reward. The memo came on a Tuesday. Slipped under my apartment door while I was at work. Expensive paper, no signature, but I recognized my mother's handwriting. "You're destroying our name. Stop this immediately, or we'll be forced to take action." I framed it next to the invoice for my childhood, my wall of shame, becoming a monument to their priorities. Their action turned out to be a whisper campaign among their society friends. Suddenly, I was unstable, vindictive, a troubled young woman. Acting out of spite, they spread rumors that I'd fabricated the evidence against them, that I was mentally ill, that the foundation was a front for my own financial crimes. The country club circuit ate it up like the gossip-starved vultures they were. But here's what they didn't understand about the real world. Results matter more than rumors. Every person we helped became an advocate. Every scammer we caught generated press coverage. Every dollar we recovered built our reputation where it counted, not in country clubs, but in communities. 6 months after launching the foundation, I received an unexpected call. Dolores Chen, my grandmother's best friend from her teaching days, had read about our work. "Rose would be so proud," she said, her voice warm with memories. "Did you know she tried to start something similar in the 70s? But your grandfather? Well, image mattered more back then, too." We met for tea in her tiny apartment, surrounded by photos of the life my grandmother had lived before becoming a Whitfield. Teaching certificates, protest signs, pictures of her laughing with students who'd gone on to change the world in their own ways. "She saw it in you from the beginning," Dolores confided. "The last time we spoke, she said, Marlene's going to do what I couldn't. She's going to make the name mean something real." I thought about that conversation as I stood before the state attorney general 6 months later, accepting a commendation for the foundation's work. We'd helped recover $12 million in stolen funds. We'd put 7 scammers behind bars. We'd given dozens of families closure and justice. My parents attended the ceremony. Of course they did. It was a public event, cameras present, important people to impress. They sat in the back, their faces masks of polite attention, probably calculating how to spin this into evidence of their excellent parenting. "The Rose Whitfield Foundation represents the best of what we can be," the Attorney General said, presenting the award. "Turning personal privilege into public service, using expertise to protect the vulnerable. This is what legacy really means." I held the award, our award, really, belonging to everyone who'd believed in the work, and looked directly at my parents for the first time since that dinner. My mother's face was perfectly composed, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not pride exactly, maybe just the recognition that I'd become everything they'd never wanted me to be, visible for all the right reasons. Vernon and Sheila Whitfield had spent their lives building a name that looked good in society columns. I was building one that mattered in court records. They'd taught me the importance of legacy, just not the way they'd intended. After the ceremony, as reporters asked about future plans and foundation goals, I spotted my parents slipping out the side door. Still running from questions that mattered, still choosing image over substance. But their approval was a currency I no longer needed. I had something better, Grandma Rose's true inheritance, the belief that a name should stand for something more than styled photographs and stolen money. 2 years. That's how long it took for the invoice to yellow at the edges, for the memo to fade behind glass, for those framed reminders to become just office decor rather than daily fuel. 2 years of building something larger than my parents' disappointment, of discovering that success tastes sweeter when you define it yourself. I was reviewing case files on a Thursday evening, the office empty except for the ghosts of good work done, when Sandra called. "Your parents' attorney reached out," she said without preamble. "They want to meet, no lawyers, no demands, just talk." "About what?" He wouldn't say. "But Marlene?" He sounded tired. I agreed to meet them, but not at their mansion, not at the country club, not anywhere they could stage manage the encounter. We met at Rosemary's Cafe, the little diner where Grandma Rose used to take me for pancakes when my parents were too busy with more important children. Neutral ground, or as close as we could get. They looked older. Not dramatically so, but in the way that living with secrets ages you from the inside out. My mother's perfect facade showed cracks in the afternoon light. My father's commanding presence had shrunk to something more human-sized. "The Hartley board contacted us," he said without preamble, "about the embezzlement." I set down my coffee carefully. "I didn't tell them about." "No, not that." He cleared his throat. "They want to hire Vanguard. Said if you could build what you built while we..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "While you tried to destroy me?" My mother flinched. "We never tried to destroy you, Marlene. We just wanted you to be someone else." I met her eyes steadily. "You wanted me to be Brittany, or at least a reasonable facsimile, someone whose success you could understand and claim." Silence stretched between us, filled with 20 years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities. Finally my father spoke. "The invoice was Sheila's idea," he said quietly. I thought, if we made it about money, you'd understand we were serious. That family means something." "Family does mean something," I agreed. "It means Gretchen calling me at midnight because she found a lead on a case. It means Marcus bringing me soup when I work through lunch. It means Jennifer naming her daughter Rose after the foundation that gave her purpose. It means choosing each other every single day, not because of blood or obligation, but because we see each other clearly and choose to stay." My mother reached for her purse, and I tensed, expecting another memo or legal document. Instead, she pulled out a worn newspaper clipping, the article about my first case at Pemberton, the one where I'd saved the nonprofit. "I kept this," she said softly. "I told everyone at Bridge Club. They didn't understand why I was proud of accounting work, but I was. I am. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever get, maybe the closest they could come to admitting they'd been wrong. I looked at these people who'd given me life but never understood it, who'd provided everything except acceptance, and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. I know about the Riverside development, I said quietly. Both of them stiffened. The environmental violations, the bribed inspectors, it's all going to come out eventually. These things always do. Are you threatening us? My father's voice held more exhaustion than heat. No, I'm offering you the chance to get ahead of it. Come clean, pay the fines, make it right. Show Brittany and Chase that the family name can mean accountability, not just accumulation. They exchanged looks I couldn't read, decades of marriage compressed into a glance. Think about it, I continued, standing to leave. Grandma Rose used to say the truth was like water. It always finds its way through the cracks. You can let it destroy your foundation, or you can channel it into something useful. I left money for the coffee and walked out, not waiting for their response. The evening air felt fresh with possibility, with the promise of work that mattered waiting back at the office. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Vernon Whitfield had self-reported violations at his flagship development. The headlines were brutal but brief, overtaken quickly by the next scandal, the next fall from grace. But in the financial crime community, people noticed. A developer taking responsibility before getting caught? That was news. Chase called me the day after the story broke. Did you make him do it? No, I said honestly. I just showed him the door. He had to walk through it himself. There was a pause. Maybe we could talk sometime about what you do. I'm thinking maybe the family business needs someone who understands numbers, really understands them. It wasn't reconciliation, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start, and starts were something I'd learned to value. That night, I stood in my office looking at the framed invoice and memo, these artifacts of who my family thought I should pay to be. Tomorrow I decided I'd take them down. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I no longer needed the reminder. My worth wasn't measured in their disappointment or their approval. It was counted in cases solved, victims helped, justice served. The phone rang. Another case, another chance to find the truth in the numbers. I smiled as I answered. Vanguard Forensic Solutions, Marlene speaking. My real name, my real work, my real worth. Finally I was home. Have you ever felt like the black sheep in your family? Like no matter what you achieved, it would never be the right kind of success in their eyes? I spent 32 years trying to fit into a mold that was never designed for me, believing that family meant accepting whatever treatment they decided to dish out. But real family, the kind that matters, sees you for who you are and celebrates it. They don't send you invoices for your childhood or memos about your failures. They show up, they support, and they stay. If you've ever been told you're not enough, too different, or choosing the wrong path, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's limitations. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build your own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. Share your story in the comments. Tell me about the moment you chose yourself, the family you built, or the success that came from being exactly who you are. Every story of self-validation makes someone else's journey a little easier. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Whether you're the family disappointment or the black sheep, remember, the most important validation comes from within. You don't owe anyone a different version of yourself. You don't owe them their expectations. The only person you owe is the one looking back at you in the mirror. And that person deserves your absolute best, whatever form it takes. Your worth was never negotiable. It's time to stop letting others treat it like it is.